Hello, welcome. You're watching BBC News. Let's get more on our top story, that long-awaited report into alleged Russian interference in UK politics. It says that Moscow poses an immediate and urgent threat to national security. Well, we're joined by Dr. Nigel Gould-Davies, the Senior Fellow for Russia and Eurasia at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. You're also a former Russia expert at the Foreign Office. Can you tell us, did we miss what was happening in terms of the threat posed by Russia? Was it the intelligence services that couldn't cope with handling terrorism and also the growing threat from Russia? Or was it the government being complacent? Or do we just simply have this Russian money within our system that we turn a blind eye to it?
I think that those who have always followed Russia most closely will be least surprised by the revelations in the report. And there's long been concern stretching back even further back, in fact, than the report charts to the previous decade, worries about the growing signs of Russian influence. I don't think it's an operational failure. I don't think the machinery of the civil service or Whitehall itself is so much at fault here. I think it's more a matter of, as you say, and as the report says, successive governments that have not provided the focus and attention and resources necessary for this. But there are some reasons for this, and you touched on an important one. There are significant domestic interests within Britain, a large industry of so-called providers of oligarch valet services in the financial industry, PR, property, and so on, who have benefited significantly from these arrangements. And what they've done, in effect, is, wittingly or unwittingly, have facilitated the extension of the influence of essentially an adversary. So we've had a contradiction between, on the one hand, the growing threat that Russia as a state presents, on the other hand, various groups and interests within Britain making that possible. And what the report draws attention to is the fundamental contradiction in that picture, and the need to reform and get to grips with aspects of our domestic arrangements to prevent this happening.
So by domestic arrangements, what are you touching upon? Is it the people, that the enablers, the lawyers that kind of help with the system of Russian money within the UK system, or some of the politicians that perhaps benefit from that money? Where should the focus be?
Well, for the most part, these are people who have not broken the law, so there's a limit to the extent to which we should blame them. It's more a matter of a permissive political and regulatory environment. For a long time, there was so-called light touch regulation, which didn't legally require sufficient checks and due diligence to be conducted on the money that was brought into the UK and how it was used, and indeed to the UK's overseas territories as well. On the matter of politics, yes, there is concern, and the report draws attention to this, that at the specific level of the political class, there has been exercise of influence. The report notes, for example, that MPs who sit in the House of Commons are obliged to report any income that they receive from outside of Parliament, but members of the House of Lords do not. And that's something that needs to be corrected, because one way of laundering reputations, as popular with Russian companies, has been to hire so-called lords on boards, who don't always ask too many questions, but are used to burnish reputations and make sure that things perhaps sail through that shouldn't. So Britain has prided itself on being open and receptive to the world. There's nothing wrong with that in principle, but without the sufficient apparatus of security scrutiny that should be the other side of that coin.
And from your understanding, when we see the huge amount of wealth within certain Russian households in the UK, that kind of money, can that be gained with complete separation from Moscow, or is there a relationship there? Is there support from the Russian government there?
There's often support. I mean, Russia is more than anything defined by the rule of relationships. So it's connectedness that enables many, not everyone, but many, possibly most of the wealthiest people to prosper. And what we've seen Britain play a key role in, unfortunately, is the use of so-called regulatory arbitrage. So people making money by the rule of relationships and being connected in Russia, but taking it out of Russia and putting it into safe places where the rule of law rather than relationships holds. And so we're looking at the financial arrangements. We're looking also at libel laws, which make it very difficult sometimes to draw attention to these things. So Britain has been a very obliging and protective place for those, not only from Russia, but from other parts of the world as well, who may not have earned their money in ways that we would approve of, but are allowed to keep it here without too much difficulty. That's a problem. But as I say, and as the report draws attention to, the more serious problem is not just the money being squirreled away safely, it's that it is actively used to, in many cases, to advance a Russian state agenda. That's the real worry and the real thing that's most urgent to get to grips with.
A fascinating insight. Dr. Nigel Gould-Davies from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, thank you so much for your time.